Imagine you're walking outside. It's a perfectly normal day. The sun is setting, the air is cooling down. You're thinking about dinner, or you're thinking about a text you forgot to reply to, and then the sky tears open. You look up. Everyone on the street stops, and they look up. The clouds roll back, but not from the wind. They're pushed aside by a light so bright it makes your eyes water. And up there, suspended in the atmosphere, hundreds of miles wide, blocking out the stars, is a face. Whatever figure your specific culture reveres, there it is, looking down at you. And then the impossible happens. You don't just see it, you hear it. But not from the sky, not from the atmosphere. Inside your own head. A voice speaking directly to your mind, in your own language, telling you that the end of the world has arrived. What do? You fall to your knees. You surrender. Everyone does. Because how do you fight the ultimate power? You don't. But what if it isn't divine? What if it's a laser? What if the voice in your head is a microwave frequency beamed from a low Earth orbit satellite? What if the apocalypse is just a military operation? Alright, you made it. The signal's not perfect, but it's coming through. If you're listening to this right now, I'm guessing you've had that moment. The one that shows up late when everything's quiet. Where you look at something totally normal and your brain goes, hang on, that doesn't feel right. That's because the official version of reality is always so clean. Everything's an accident. Everything's a coincidence. Nobody meant anything by it. But then you start lining up the little details, and it stops being clean. It starts to look consistent. And I'm not saying that proves a grand plan. I'm not saying you should panic. I'm just saying it's hard to sleep once you notice the pattern. So tonight, we're going to do this the way it's supposed to be done. No yelling, no fake certainty, just a story, a trail of crumbs, and one question. What if the normal explanation is the cover story? Welcome to the Tin Foil Diaries. Now, let's open tonight's file. Welcome back to the Tin Foil Diaries, where we don't just look at the shadows, we look at the light casting them. I'm your host, and tonight's entry is called The Sky is Lying, the Project Bluebeam Conspiracy. Most conspiracy theories are about things being hidden, files locked in a subterranean vault, handshakes made behind closed doors, trillions of dollars buried in offshore accounts. But this one? This is one of the biggest, most visible magic tricks in human history. It's the theory that a shadow government, the New World Order, plans to fake the end of the world. And they aren't going to do it with news reports or forged documents. They're going to do it with holographic projections in the sky, artificial telepathy pumped into your skull, and manufactured natural disasters. All designed to break humanity's spirit, erase national borders, and usher in a single authoritarian global state. We're going to break this down layer by layer. We'll look at the journalists who died trying to warn the world. We'll walk through the 4 exact steps of the artificial apocalypse. And then we're going to look at the real world science. Because the scariest part of this theory isn't the science fiction, it's the military facts they use to build it. So lock the doors, close the blinds, let's open the file. Every good conspiracy has a prophet, someone who sees the shape of the puzzle before anyone else even knows the pieces are on the table. For Project Bluebeam, that man was Serge Monast, Serge was an investigative journalist and author working in Canada in the 1980s and 90s. He wasn't a mainstream reporter. He operated on the fringe. He dug into the deep, dark, uncomfortable corners of global politics. He wrote about secret societies, the Illuminati, the encroaching New World Order, and the push for a cashless society tracked by microchips. In the early 90s, that kind of talk made you sound like a lunatic. Today, it just sounds like a Wednesday on the internet. But in 1994, Monast published a document that would change the conspiracy landscape forever. It was called Project Bluebeam. Monast claimed he had uncovered a highly classified multinational black project. He said NASA, the United Nations, and a cabal of global elites were working together on a psychological warfare operation so massive it would literally rewrite reality. The goal? To destroy all existing religion, to abolish national identities, and to force an exhausted, terrified world to submit to a single global dictator. Now, I know how that sounds. It sounds like a rejected script for a James Bond villain. It sounds like the rantings of a guy who stayed up way too late watching sci-fi movies online. But here's the weird thing. Monast wasn't just spinning yarns for profit. He was genuinely terrified. He genuinely believed he had kicked a hornet's nest. He claimed he was being targeted by authorities. He claimed his children were taken from him by the state, placed into the system specifically to break his mind and stop his research. He became increasingly paranoid, telling his inner circle that the government possessed weapons that could induce heart attacks from a distance. In December 1996, he was arrested in Montreal and spent a night in jail. He was released the next day, and within 24 hours, he died at home. He was 51 years old. The official cause was a heart attack. Now, in the conspiracy world, there's no such thing as a convenient heart attack, especially not for a 51-year-old man who had just spent years claiming the government uses psychotronic weapons to assassinate dissidents by giving them heart attacks. Adding fuel to the fire, one of Monast's close associates, who was also investigating Bluebeam, reportedly died of a heart attack within weeks of Monast. So let's slow down for just a second. What exactly did Serge Monast know that got him killed? What was the blueprint he uncovered? Monast didn't just say they're going to fake the apocalypse. He outlined a specific 4-step protocol. He laid it out like a military operations manual, and the sheer detail is what makes it stick in your brain decades later. Step 1. The manufactured earthquakes. According to Bluebeam, the first phase involves using advanced artificial technology to create massive earthquakes at specific strategic locations around the world. These aren't just random natural disasters designed to cause chaos. They are highly targeted. The earthquakes are designed to unearth new archaeological discoveries, whether it's hidden caves, buried temples, or ancient scrolls. And these new discoveries will allegedly prove that every major religion's core text were fundamentally misunderstood or entirely fabricated. It's a psychological softening tactic. You break the foundational bedrock of human faith so people are untethered, lost, desperate for a new truth. Step 2. The space show. This is the famous part, the part everyone remembers. Monast claimed that giant 3-dimensional holograms would be projected into the sky worldwide. The sky itself, specifically the atmospheric sodium layer about 60 miles up, would act like a massive cinematic screen. Lasers fired from a network of low Earth orbit satellites would create images of deities. If you're in a Christian region, you would see Christ. If you're in a Buddhist region, you would see Buddha. If you're in an Islamic region, you would see a representation of Allah. And then the images will slowly merge. They will morph into a single unified entity, the architect of the New World religion. But seeing a giant face in the sky isn't enough. You might think it's a trick. You might think it's a hallucination. But the next step is what turns that doubt into solid belief. Step 3, artificial telepathy. This is where the theory gets deeply, intimately unsettling. Step 3 claims the global elite possess technology operating on extremely low frequency, ELF, very low frequency, VLF, and low frequency, LF waves. These waves would be beamed directly into the brains of the population. You wouldn't hear the new God through a loudspeaker echoing over the city. You would hear it inside your own head. You would think it was your own internal monologue or the genuine divine voice of the Creator telling you to lay down your weapons and submit to the new order. Step 4, the universal supernatural manifestation, the grand finale. This step involves projecting terrifying illusions globally to break the last remaining pockets of resistance. Simulated alien invasions hitting major cities, forcing nations to use their nuclear weapons and essentially disarm themselves. A fake rapture where people believe they're being beamed up to heaven, but it's actually a technological illusion meant to disappear dissidents. And finally, poltergeist activity projected directly through fiber optics, televisions, and phone lines into every home, driving the remaining population completely mad with terror. Out of that engineered chaos, the New World Order steps in. They offer peace. They offer order. All you have to do is give them everything. It's a lot, right? It's Independence Day meets the Book of Revelation, directed by a shadow government. It's so absurdly large in scale that it's easy to brush off as the ultimate paranoid fantasy. But then, I started looking into the actual technology required to pull this off. And that changes the way this story feels. Let's step away from Serge Monast for a minute. Let's step out of the 1990s conspiracy forums. And let's look at the United States military. During the first Gulf War in 1991, the U.S. Air Force was trying to figure out how to demoralize the Iraqi Republican Guard without dropping bombs. They wanted a psychological weapon. And some officials came up with an idea. A literal, documented, psychological operations idea. They proposed projecting a massive holographic image of Allah over Baghdad. An image that would command Iraqi soldiers to drop their weapons and surrender. To tell you the truth, when I first read that, I had to double check the source. I assumed it was internet fiction, but it's real. It was reported in the Washington Post in 1999. They actually discussed it. They didn't do it, partly because the holographic technology wasn't advanced enough at the time, and partly because atmospheric conditions had to be perfectly calibrated to project an image into the sky. But the intent was there. The military literally looked at the sky and thought, can we use this as a screen to manipulate a population's religious beliefs? And what about step 1, the artificial earthquakes? Conspiracy theorists point immediately to HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It's a massive array of antennas in Galkuna, Alaska, designed to study the ionosphere. HAARP was established in 1993, right around the time Monast was putting together his blue beam theory. While the military insists it's just for studying radio communications, theorists argue it's an ionospheric heater capable of weaponizing weather and triggering seismic faults. But the most disturbing piece of the puzzle is step 3, the telepathy, hearing voices in your head. Surely that's pure science fiction. We can't beam voices into people's skulls. Actually, we can. It's a documented biological phenomenon. It's called the Fry effect, or the microwave auditory effect. In 1961, an American neuroscientist named Alan Fry published a paper detailing how human beings can hear microwaves. If you pulse a microwave beam at a specific frequency, the brain interprets the thermal expansion of tissue in the inner ear as sound. You hear clicks, you hear buzzing. And eventually, researchers realized you could modulate those pulses to transmit actual words. They called it V2K, voice to skull technology. It's not magic, it's not psychic powers, it's directed energy. In the early 2000s, a military project called Medusa, which stands for Mob Access Deterrent Using Silent Audio, was developed to use the Fry effect for crowd control. It beamed loud, painful audio directly into the skulls of a target audience without anyone else hearing it. And if you follow the news about the Havana syndrome, where diplomats globally reported hearing strange sounds and suffering neurological damage from suspected directed energy weapons, you start to realize this tech isn't just theory, it's in the field. So let's look at the scoreboard. Artificial earthquakes. People believe we have HARP. Holograms in the sky. The military actively considered it for psychological warfare. Voices in your head. Alan Fry proved it biologically possible over 60 years ago. This is where the situation takes an unsettling turn. Serge Monast might have been paranoid, but the ingredients for his nightmare? They exist. They are literally sitting on the shelf. Monast wrote his manifesto in 1994. For a long time, Project Bluebeam was a retro conspiracy, a vintage 90s era theory passed around on dial-up message boards, slowly fading into obscurity. And kids, if you don't know what a dial-up message board is, ask your grandparents. But lately, Bluebeam has been making a massive, explosive comeback. And that's because of what's happening right now with the government and UFOs. Let's talk about Wernher von Braun. Von Braun was the brilliant aerospace engineer who helped design the V-2 rocket for Nazi Germany before being secretly brought to the U.S. through Operation Paperclip. He became the father of the American space program and the Apollo missions. In the 1970s, as von Braun was dying of cancer, he had an assistant named Carol Rosen. According to Rosen, von Braun spent his final months warning her about the weaponization of space. He allegedly told her that the military-industrial complex would manufacture a series of global threats to justify unlimited budgets and the placing of weapons in orbit. He actually gave her the sequence. First, they would use the Soviet Union, the Cold War. Next, they would use terrorists. Then, they would use rogue nations. Then, they would use the threat of asteroids. And finally, remember, Carol, he reportedly said, the last card is the alien card. We are going to have to build space-based weapons to defend against aliens. And it's all a lie. The last card. A manufactured alien threat. Now look at the news over the past few years. The Pentagon officially released videos of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Fighter pilots like David Fravor testifying before Congress about tic-tac-shaped craft breaking the laws of physics. Intelligence whistleblowers like David Grush standing under oath claiming the government has recovered non-human biologics and intact spacecraft. For 80 years, the government told us UFOs were swamp gas, weather balloons, mass hysteria. They ruined careers to keep people quiet. Now suddenly they're doing press tours. They're holding congressional hearings saying, actually, there are things in our airspace and we don't know what they are. To the average person, this is exciting. It's historic. But to a Blue Beam believer, this is phase 4. This is the setup. The theory suggests that the current UFO disclosure movement is a highly orchestrated narrative. They are seeding the idea of an alien threat into the public consciousness. Hollywood has spent decades conditioning us to expect an invasion. Now the Pentagon is validating it. What happens if tomorrow massive ships appear over New York, London, and Tokyo? What happens if it's an incredibly sophisticated drone swarm paired with holographic projectors and paired with V2K audio, making you feel pure terror? Ronald Reagan gave a famous speech at the United Nations in 1987. He said, "I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world." Conspiracy theorists point to that quote and say, he wasn't being philosophical. He was reading from the playbook. If you want to erase borders, you need an enemy that has no borders. And if you don't have one, you build it. So why does Project Bluebeam endure? Why, 30 years after Serge Monast died, are people on TikTok and X talking about it every time a weird cloud formation appears or every time a congressional hearing mentions aliens? Because Bluebeam preys on our deepest, most primal vulnerability, our reliance on our own senses. We are biologically wired to believe what we see and hear. If I see a chair, it's a chair. If I hear a voice, someone is speaking. But we are entering an era where our senses are actively being hacked. We have deep fakes that can make the President of the United States say anything. We have AI-generated audio that can perfectly mimic your loved ones over the phone to extort you for money. We have drone shows that can create a 1,000-foot tall dragon walking across the night sky with stunning realism. Bluebeam is just the ultimate extension of that modern anxiety. It asks the terrifying question, what happens when the technology of deception outpaces the biology of perception? If you can't trust the news, you trust your eyes. But what if you can't trust your eyes? What if the sky itself is compromised? We also believe it because of the religious undertones. Almost every major culture on Earth has an apocalyptic narrative, a final battle, a judgment day. Those stories are hardwired into our collective unconscious. Bluebeam takes that ancient holy terror and turns it into a software update. It's easier to believe that a shadowy cabal of billionaires is orchestrating the end of the world than it is to accept that the world is just chaotic, unguided, and terribly fragile. A fake apocalypse implies that someone is in control. Even if they're evil, they're driving the bus. And for some people, an evil driver is better than an empty seat at the wheel. So where do we land? Is Project Bluebeam real? Here's the truth. There is zero credible evidence that NASA, the United Nations, or a global cabal is planning a holographic, telepathic, fake apocalypse to institute a one-world government. When you dig deep into the origins of the theory, it starts to look less like a leak from a black project and more like a collage of pop culture. Researchers have pointed out that Monast's 4 steps are remarkably similar to an unproduced Star Trek script written by Gene Roddenberry in the mid-1970s called the God Thing. It also borrows heavily from a concept called the Second Coming, a psychological warfare idea pitched by a cynical writer years earlier. Serge Monast was likely a man consumed by paranoia, who took real military concepts, blended them with sci-fi tropes, and convinced himself he was reading the blueprints of the apocalypse. But this is the one piece I simply can't shake. The concepts are real. The military did explore holographic psychological operations to manipulate religion. Voice-to-skull technology is based on documented biophysics that have been researched for decades. The weaponization of space is a geopolitical reality, and the manipulation of public narrative is the oldest, most effective weapon in human history. Project Bluebeam isn't a true story, but it's a perfectly accurate reflection of our modern dread. It's a warning about what happens when technology becomes indistinguishable from magic, and when the people holding the technology decide to play God. Tonight, when you step outside, look up. Look at the stars. Look at the empty, quiet black. Beautiful, isn't it? It feels immense. It feels untouchable. But remember this: every screen is blank until someone presses play. And if the sky ever does light up, if the heavens ever tear open and a voice tells you to drop to your knees, don't ask what it is. Ask who paid for the projector. Good night. If tonight's entry shifted your perspective, don't just close the app and walk away. Follow the Tin Foil Diaries wherever you listen so you'll never miss a transmission. We need your help to outsmart the algorithm. Drop a 5-star rating and a short review to prove we're not just whispering into the void. Share this episode with one person in your life who still dares to ask the uncomfortable questions. Got a lead, a redacted document, a strange coincidence, or a name you can't shake? Submit your intel and read our deep dive articles over at thetinfoildiaries.fyi. We are out there waiting in the static. We're listening for the pattern. They don't need to steal your thoughts. They simply supply them.